But we begin this hour with the mercurial president keeping all of us on the edge of our seats with what he could do next on a number of fronts. Trump continues to threaten war with Iran if they fail to meet his demands for a nuclear deal. He claimed this week that a decision on whether to commence with a military attack would come in the next 10 to 15 days. A second American aircraft carrier is already headed to the region. Trump is remaining defiant in the face of the Supreme Court's ruling, striking down his sweeping global tariffs, first signing a new executive order Friday that imposes now a 10% tariff on all countries under a different statute, and then announcing yesterday that he's already raising it to 15%. He also went as far on Friday of accusing the justices who voted against his tariffs of being under foreign influence, though not providing any evidence to back such a claim. All of this is likely to come to a head 2 days from now, when Trump delivers his first State of the Union address to the nation in front of many of the justices that he's attacked and also had appointed, potentially laying out his plans on these and other major issues now facing our country. Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York. He is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman Meeks, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good to be with you this morning.
Let's start on Iran. What have you learned about the status of negotiations and whether or not you think a limited strike, which is what the Wall Street Journal had been reporting before the weekend, was a potentially imminent possibility?
You know, I wish I could tell you and say to you that I've been fully briefed, that the Congress has been fully briefed, that we know what the president's intent is, that he is and has laid out a plan of action of what he's doing, at least to the Gang of 8 or the Gang of 12. But I can't say that to you. This president has not come to Congress at all. We have no idea why or what he is intending to do. And the one that has the power to make that determination is the Congress. This is the first president, and I've been in Washington for a long period of time, who seems to try to avoid what his responsibilities are, and that is to deal with Congress and give us and let us utilize the power that we have. Show us what your intent is. It has happened in the Bush administration, George W. Bush. It happened in the Obama administration. We had these dialogue and conversations in the Biden administration. The only one that seems to think that he's a king and can avoid having Congress involved is Donald J. Trump. And the only ones that he has negotiating this deal is not really, Marco Rubio's not negotiating anything. The State Department is not. It's two people who are basically negotiating real estate deals, and that is Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. So this president is running amok, and I think that it is up to my colleagues, Republican colleagues particularly, to join with Democrats to let's rein him in. And let's make sure that if we have to, we use our Article 1 powers and do not give him the money to move forward until he talks to us.
What do you have to say, though, to at least one of your Democratic colleagues, Josh Gottheimer, who believes that calling a war powers resolution to the House floor is a sign of weakness and could potentially hinder an attack against Iran?
No, well, he should at least, as I just stated, at least be talking to the Gang of 8, as every president has. Congress should be involved at least in a bipartisan leadership level, so that then immediately thereafter a strike, then you can still come back to Congress to say what you need. We should not just give the president a blank check, give him whatever he wants. That's then, what do you need a Congress for? The Congress was created to be an oversight body of the executive branch and a separate but equal branch of government, not something that yields all of its power to the president. We have that power. It belongs to us. It's there for a reason, and the president should acknowledge that.
Congressman, when you're looking at the U.S. military buildup near the Middle East, you have the USS Abraham Lincoln, Gerald R. Ford carrier groups, 50 additional fighter jets, command and control aircraft, critical air defenses, dozens of refueling tankers. This does not seem like a location where a lot of negotiations are looking fruitful, or that the administration feels like they're going to get something here. Or is this just President Trump trying to look big and tough in order to get a deal at the end of the day? Because what our allies continue to see with us is kind of an uncertainty. It's happening all the time on his decisions, especially on foreign policy decisions.
Well, it creates uncertainty for sure. Foreign policy-wise, economically, because we see the uncertainty that it's costing us with reference to the cost of living for Americans. But when you see him putting in all of the carrier ships and jets in place, you do not know what his intent is, whether it's a small strike, whether it's a large strike, whether it's going to be people on the ground, whether it's regime change. These are all things that should be being discussed with, at minimum, the Gang of Eight, but if not the Gang of 12 and the entire Congress. But I also say the American people has a right to know. The American people. And so one of the things that he should be doing on Tuesday is letting the American people know what his intent is. As I said, I can recall going to war in Iraq. Now, we may not ultimately agree with the outcome of what the president does, but George W. Bush made every cabinet member accessible and available to members of Congress. We had open hearings in the appropriate committees. We had classified hearings. I had access to the Pentagon and the military, so that I could make a judgment on how I wanted to vote on a situation in Iraq at that time. And that's the hardest vote probably that you ever have to make as a member of Congress, is to make a determination of whether you're going to send and risk the lives of American men and women. So that is a responsibility that I am vested with, and I want to make sure that I have the opportunity to do and make those kind of decisions on behalf of the people that I represent and the American people.
Congressman Meeks, I want to get your reaction to something that happened just before we started this new hour of the weekend. This is part of a statement from the United States Secret Service. On February 22nd, around 1:30 a.m., a male in his early 20s was shot by U.S. Secret Service agents and a deputy from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office following an unauthorized entry into the secure perimeter at Mar-a-Lago. The individual, whose identity is being withheld pending a notification of next of kin, was pronounced dead. The individual was observed by the north gate of the Mar-a-Lago property carrying what appeared to be a shotgun and a fuel can. We are expecting the Secret Service and other law enforcement entities to do a press conference at some point this hour. But just given what I read to you, Congressman, just your reaction about what we're learning that happened in the early hours this morning at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, I'm very concerned about that. I don't want violence. I don't advocate for violence and the shooting or the attempting assassination of anyone. That's not who we are and should not be, and not who we are as a nation. And I will await further information as to exactly what took place and why. But, we condemn any type of violence and any type of assassination attempts. If that's what took place, I'd like to hear more and get more information.
Congressman Meeks, the State of the Union address is on Tuesday. Is there anything you're hoping to hear from the president when it comes to foreign affairs? We kind of know what he's going to say about tariffs, but on Iran and other things, maybe even America's standing in the world.
Well, I would hope that he would come on State of the Union. I know he's not going to do it, and apologize to the American people. Apologize for isolating us from the rest of the world. Apologize for treating our allies as if they're our adversaries and our adversaries as if they're our allies. Apologize for a foreign policy that does not include in working with the members of Congress. Apologize to the Ukrainian people who have been fighting for their survival against Vladimir Putin, and who he seems to only put pressure on Vladimir Putin and not, only pressure on Ukraine and not on Russia. So these are things that I would hope that he would do, because he's been wrong on it all the way. You look at what he's doing now it's just trying to put his name on things and have individuals who do not share our values. Our historic allies are all turning their backs to us now. So he's making us more vulnerable. Look at what he's doing with selling AI chips, which puts our national security at risk for the benefit of him and his family making money. So if he was going to do the right thing, he should come to the State of the Union and apologize to the American people for the way that he has been president